Just days after his father's death, a 5-year-old boy is thrown into the snow by his cold-hearted stepmother. She calls him, tosses his clothes onto the frozen street, and locks the door behind him. But fate was not finished with this boy. A neighbor saw everything. A police officer was just 1 block away, and a loyal German shepherd was ready to act. Astoria, Oregon in January was a place where silence had weight. Snow didn't just fall here, it settled with intent, pressing into rooftops, tucking between the bones of the old harbor town, until everything looked like it had been dusted in regret. The Columbia River moved slow and gray beside it, churning under the long stretch of the Megler Bridge, where fog clung like sorrow that refused to lift. Wind off the Pacific coast howled through the crooked alleyways, carrying with it the smell of salt, rust, and pine. The kind of air that scraped your cheeks raw and left your breath visible like ghost stories in the cold. At 2410 Duane Street, just 2 blocks uphill from the harbor, the front door of a 2-story Victorian house swung open. The house, painted in once proud navy blue now faded by years of weather and indifference, belonged to the late Evan Hart, a ship carpenter known around Astoria as a kind man with strong hands, a weather-worn face, and a laugh that could drown out a storm. But Evan was no longer inside that house. Just 3 days prior, he'd fallen in his workshop, his chest collapsing from a silent heart attack beneath a half-carved hull. By the time the medics arrived, it was over. What remained was his grieving 5-year-old son, a funeral photo on the mantel, and a house that no longer echoed with warmth. Milo Hart stood on the icy porch, clutching a dented metal lunchbox in both arms, his small frame wrapped in a coat 2 sizes too large. The coat had once belonged to his father, gray wool patched at the elbows, still faintly smelling of cedar dust. Inside the lunchbox were all his most important things: a crumpled drawing of a boat, a photograph of him and Evan in front of the workshop, a marble with a chipped swirl, and a paper boat named Minnow, folded so often its creases had become scars. At the door, standing tall with arms folded tight across her chest, was Sable Whitaker, the woman Milo had been told to call Mom, though she never called him son. Sable was 33 with a striking but cold kind of beauty, shoulder-length straight black hair always parted down the center, cheekbones sharp enough to slice paper, and eyes like polished slate, distant, reflective, hard. Her skin was pale and porcelain smooth, untouched by sun or affection. Sable had met Evan a year after Milo's mother died of pneumonia. She'd come to Astoria from Portland as an interior designer with big plans and a designer wardrobe. What Evan saw as charm and order, others had quietly called control and calculation. She had never loved Milo. Not truly. He was messy, loud, too much like his father. "You're not listening again," Sable said, her voice clipped and thin. "I told you to pack the rest of your things. I don't want to see Legos in the hallway. Not after the guests we had yesterday." Milo didn't answer. His eyes were on the snow as it gathered around his boots. Each flake that landed on his sleeve melted instantly, leaving behind tiny dark dots. The chill had already seeped through his socks, numbing his toes. But he stood still, breathing through his nose the way his father had taught him when scared. Sable exhaled hard. "If you can't follow simple instructions, I can't help you. I'm not your maid. I've tried. I have bills to pay and no energy for tantrums. This house is not a daycare." From behind her, the living room was still cluttered with wilted funeral flowers and half-empty dishes from the casseroles people brought. The framed photo of Evan, smiling, holding a chisel, still sat beside an unlit candle. Sable didn't look at it. She stepped forward and dropped a canvas bag on the porch. It thudded flat beside Milo's feet, scattering snow. "There, that's your stuff. Coat, shoes, a few books. You can go stay with June Lark until I figure something else out." Milo's lip trembled. "I don't want to go." "Well," Sable snapped, "I didn't want my life falling apart either, but here we are." From across the street, behind a curtain of frost-speckled glass, Mrs. June Lark stood watching. At 67, June was as much a fixture of the neighborhood as the Lighthouse Museum. She was a short, round woman with wispy gray hair always pulled into a loose bun, thick glasses, and a floral apron that seemed permanently dusted in flour. Widowed for over a decade, June spent most mornings baking pies and most afternoons muttering her opinions to the birds outside her window. She had loved Evan like a nephew and adored Milo like a grandson, and what she saw now turned her blood cold. The image was clear, a grieving child being pushed into the snow by a woman in black. As the remnants of his life were tossed behind him like trash, Milo bent to pick up his boat, which had fallen from his lunchbox onto the step. He clutched it tightly even as his fingers turned red in the cold. June turned away from the window and reached for the rotary phone on her kitchen wall. Her voice was steady despite the tremble in her heart. "Yes, it's Mrs. Lark. You need to send someone. She's putting him out." "Yes, the boy. Milo Hart. His daddy just passed and she's throwing him into the snow like yesterday's newspaper." 15 minutes later, the familiar hum of a patrol SUV came around the corner, its tires crackling on the salted road. The vehicle parked at the curb and out stepped Sergeant Nora Delgado, Astoria's only female officer, and easily its most respected. Nora was 36, lean and strong with olive skin, tightly braided auburn hair under a gray beanie, and eyes that had seen both tragedy and grace. She spoke little, listened well, and was known for always being calm, even when storms rose fast and hard. From the back of the SUV emerged a large German shepherd, his breath fogging the air. Kodiak was 4 years old, muscular and intelligent, with thick black and tan fur and a keen gaze. His ears were always alert, his posture proud. He had served alongside Nora since he was a pup, and though he rarely barked, he was deeply protective, especially of the small and voiceless. As Nora approached the porch, Sable crossed her arms tighter and offered a half-smile, half-frown that tried to signal composure but reeked of defensiveness. "Sergeant," she said coolly. "This is a misunderstanding." Nora's eyes shifted between the still sniffling boy, the bag on the ground, and the cold hollowness in Sable's stance. "Is it? I'm overwhelmed. The boy has been acting out, crying, throwing things, refusing meals. He needs help. I'm trying to arrange something more professional." Milo stood motionless, eyes on his boots, boat in hand, his breath shallow. Nora knelt beside him, her voice a gentle rumble. "Hey there, bud. That's a nice ship. What's her name?" "Minnow," Milo whispered. "Strong little boat," she said. "Mind if you and Minnow come with me for a bit? Just somewhere warm. We'll figure this out together, okay?" He nodded slowly. Sable didn't argue. Not once did she bend to hug him or call him back. She turned and closed the door behind her with a soft, definitive click. As Nora lifted the bag and led Milo to the SUV, Kodiak walked beside them, close and protective. The boy reached out and without hesitation rested his hand gently on the dog's thick fur. June Lark stood on her porch, watching them drive away. Snow continued falling, covering the spot where Milo had stood with a quiet, indifferent beauty. The drive from Duane Street to Maple Hollow Lane only took 7 minutes, but to Milo Hart, it felt like crossing into another country. The snow fell thicker now, gathering along the window ledges of the patrol SUV, blurring the town into smudged whites and grays. His breath made small clouds on the glass, and every now and then he traced a circle with his finger, as if trying to look back toward the house he'd just been pushed out of. Nora kept the heater on low. She glanced into the rearview mirror occasionally, but didn't press the boy with questions. She'd learned long ago that silence was sometimes kinder than words. Kodiak sat beside Milo in the back, tail curled neatly to his side, amber eyes alert yet soft. The boy rested one hand on the dog's thick fur, his fingers twisting gently, not gripping, just holding like someone afraid the weight of the world might lift him off the seat if he let go. Nora's home stood at the far edge of Astoria, past the old fish cannery, and up a winding drive bordered by tall evergreens. The cabin-style house was modest, single-story, wide porch painted deep forest green with pine cones carved into the trim. A motion-activated porch light flickered on as the SUV rolled in, revealing a shoveled path and stacked firewood by the door. Nora parked, turned to Milo and said, "No pressure, okay? It's just a stopover. A warm place. We'll figure things out with the department in the morning." He didn't respond, but his eyes blinked once slowly, acknowledgement. Perhaps, inside, the warmth hit like a second skin. The air smelled faintly of pine wood, cinnamon, and dog shampoo. A wood stove crackled in the corner, its orange glow bathing the room in amber light. The floor was hardwood, well-worn, and covered with mismatched rugs. A coat rack by the door held 2 hats, one woolen, one a faded police cap, and a blue and yellow striped scarf that had seen better winters. Nora gently guided Milo to a padded bench near the wall, helped him out of the oversized coat, and hung it by the fire. "Your toes must be popsicles," she said, crouching to untie his wet shoes. "You want socks or slippers?" He mumbled, "Socks," then corrected himself in a whisper. "Please." She gave a soft smile and fetched a clean fuzzy pair from a drawer in the hallway. Navy blue, too big, but warm. As she pulled them onto his tiny feet, she said, "You're my guest tonight, and guests get hot cocoa. Rule of the house." Milo gave the smallest nod, and Kodiak, sensing the shift, padded over to sit beside him. The boy leaned gently against the dog's side, his face burying slightly into the fur. While Nora prepared the cocoa in the kitchen, she called dispatch, her voice calm but measured. "Picked up the Hart boy. Mother had tossed him into the snow with a bag of clothes. Mrs. Lark witnessed it. I'll file the full report tonight, but I'm keeping the kid here till social services responds in the morning. He's cold, not hurt. No signs of physical abuse. Emotional, that's another story." She paused, hand resting on the microwave door. Yeah, I know. Another one." She hung up, poured the cocoa into a ceramic mug with snowmen dancing around the rim, added 2 marshmallows, then carried it carefully into the living room. "No rush," she said as she handed it to Milo. "Sip slow. I burn my tongue on this every time." Milo took the mug with both hands, cradling it like a small treasure. His eyes darted around the room, the bookshelves with mystery novels and old local maps, the framed black and white photo of a younger Nora in uniform, standing beside a much younger Kodiak, both grinning in front of a boat named the Promise. A toy basket in the corner held a tennis ball, some chewed rope, and a plush moose missing one antler. Nora noticed his gaze linger on the photo. "That was our first water rescue," she said. "Down near Cannon Beach. Pulled an old guy out of a kayak that flipped. Kodiak dragged him half a mile through current. He got steak that night." Milo didn't speak, but his hand slid up to rub behind Kodiak's ear, a movement both reverent and grateful. They sat in silence for a while, the kind that was warm, not awkward. Outside, the snow fell heavier, muffling the world. Inside, the fire popped gently, and the mug of cocoa slowly emptied. When the clock over the mantel struck 6, Nora stood. "Let me make a call to someone who might help us sort this out," she said. "You okay for a few minutes?" Milo nodded. In her bedroom, with the door slightly ajar, Nora dialed the number of someone she hadn't spoken to in months. "Hey, Caleb." "Yeah, I know it's been a while." On the other end, Caleb Rohr's voice crackled like gravel under boots. "Nora Delgado. Thought you gave up on old ghosts. I need to talk about Evan and the boy." A pause, a sigh. "I figured this was coming. I got your report. He's with you?" "He is. Sable threw him out today. Right into the snow. Mrs. Lark saw it." "Jesus," Caleb muttered. "That woman. Evan never trusted her. He told me 2 weeks before the accident that something wasn't right. Said he'd write something up for Milo's sake. I haven't seen it." "He may have sent something to Mrs. Lark," Nora said. "I'll ask." "Do that. And Nora, watch your back. Sable's not just cold, she's desperate. She's been hiding debt. And now, with Evan gone, yeah, Nora said quietly. That's what worries me. Back in the living room, Milo had curled up on the couch covered in an old plaid blanket. Kodiak lay beside him like a silent sentry, one paw resting protectively over the boy's feet. Nora stood in the hallway watching the scene with an ache rising in her chest. She didn't have children, never wanted to, not because she didn't care, but because the job took too much. Death, darkness, the in-between. Her world wasn't built for bedtime stories. But now, in the glow of firelight with snow burying the world outside and a sleeping child trusting her home enough to drift into dreams, she felt something shift. Something unspoken and dangerous. Something like attachment. The next morning broke slow and heavy with light barely managing to pierce the thick quilt of clouds pressing down over Astoria. Snow had stopped falling sometime before dawn, leaving the town wrapped in a muffled white stillness. Cars remained buried under soft drifts, porches disappeared beneath pale blankets, and the Columbia River looked frozen in thought. Nora stood in her kitchen in a flannel shirt and thick socks, nursing a second cup of coffee. The house was quiet, except for the low hum of the heater and the soft breathing of the boy asleep on her couch. She'd slept only in stretches, waking at every shift of Kodiak's paws, every whimper from Milo. Around 3 a.m., the boy had sat up crying softly, not calling for anyone in particular, just making that small wounded sound of a child who hasn't yet figured out how to ask for comfort. Nora had walked over, crouched beside him, and simply rested a hand on his back. He didn't speak, just leaned into the warmth. Neither of them said a word, but that quiet moment had anchored something. Now, as she watched the sky struggle to lighten, she heard the creak of the couch and the small, sleepy shuffle of socked feet. Milo stood in the hallway, clutching his lunchbox like a lifeline, eyes blurry but curious. "Do you have cereal?" he asked, barely above a whisper. "I have the good kind," Nora replied. "The one that makes the milk turn chocolate." He blinked, surprised. My mom. She didn't let me eat that." Nora raised an eyebrow and gestured toward the kitchen. "Well, it's a rule here. Cocoa cereal on snow days. No exceptions." By the time they finished breakfast, with Kodiak sitting politely at Milo's side hoping for crumbs, a knock sounded on the front door. Milo tensed, shrinking slightly behind the chair. "It's okay," Nora said, setting down her mug. "It's just June. I asked her to stop by." Mrs. June Lark stepped inside in her usual floral coat, her cheeks pink from the cold, holding a small bundle wrapped in waxed cloth. "Blueberry scones, still warm. I figured you could use something better than dry toast." Her eyes flicked to Milo and softened. "Hi, sweetheart. You warm enough today?" Milo nodded barely. June took off her gloves, warming her hands by the stove, then turned to Nora with a grave expression. "I wasn't sure if I should bring it, but I think Evan would have wanted you to have this." She pulled from her oversized purse a thin sealed envelope, plain brown, the edges slightly bent. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable, to Mrs. June Lark. "Only if something happens to me." Nora took it, holding the paper like it might dissolve in her fingers. "You've had this?" "He gave it to me just before Christmas. Said it was just in case. Told me not to open it unless." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Nora excused herself to her bedroom to read. She sat on the edge of the bed and opened the envelope with care. Inside was a folded letter written in blue ink and Evan's steady carpenter-like hand. There was no greeting. Just a few paragraphs of clean, direct language. "If you're reading this, I didn't make it. Milo is everything to me. I've done my best, but I know my health hasn't been right. I've been meaning to file a will, but haven't gotten to it in time. Sable, she isn't who I hoped she was. I've seen changes. Controlling, distant. I don't trust her with Milo. Not really. If anything happens to me, I want someone who sees my boy for who he is, not an inconvenience." Nora Delgado. I've seen how she talks to him at the farmer's market. How Milo lights up around her dog. If there's anyone who would protect him without asking why, it's her. If this counts for anything, please use it. Nora stared at the page, eyes unmoving until the edges of the letters blurred. It wasn't a legal will, not in any formal sense. But it was something, and in family court, especially in small towns like Astoria, something heartfelt could carry surprising weight. She returned to the kitchen where June and Milo were drawing boats on a paper napkin. "Thank you," Nora said simply, and June nodded, understanding the weight of the moment without needing to ask. "Would you mind staying with him a little while? I need to talk to someone else." 10 minutes later, Nora parked her SUV outside a low-slung red building on the edge of town. Rohr and Sons Boat Works. A faded sign hung above the steel door, and the smell of sawdust mixed with snow hung thick in the air. Inside, the workshop was warm with the hum of tools and the rhythm of sanding. Caleb Rohr, a broad-shouldered man in his early 40s with dark skin, graying beard, and large scarred hands, looked up from a half-built skiff. Caleb had known Evan since they were both teenagers working part-time near the harbor. Unlike Evan, Caleb had never married. After losing his younger brother in a boating accident 10 years prior, Caleb had buried himself in work. He rarely smiled, but when he did, it showed in his whole face like a door opening wide. "You got him?" Caleb asked without turning off the sander. "I do," Nora replied. "He's at my place. Eating chocolate cereal and drawing boats." Caleb smirked faintly. "Sounds about right." She handed him the letter. He read it quietly, jaw tightening with each line. "It's not a will," he said. "No, but it's something." Caleb exhaled, set the paper down, and wiped his hands on a rag. "You want backup in court? You'll have it. And I'll dig through our files. See if Evan ever signed anything here regarding Milo. He mentioned life insurance last summer. If Sable gets her hands on that, she won't," Nora said firmly. Back home, June had just finished cleaning up when Nora returned. Milo was napping beside Kodiak, one hand curled around the dog's ear, the other still holding a pencil. On the table was a new drawing, a boat named Minnow 2, bigger than the first, with sails that looked like wings. Before June left, she squeezed Nora's arm. "You're doing the right thing. But be ready. That woman's not going to let go easy." "I don't intend to make it easy for her," Nora said. That night, as snow began to fall again, Nora sat at the kitchen table and began writing her report, a full account of what happened, the witness statement from June, the contents of Evan's letter, and a formal request to the Department of Child Services for a temporary custody hold to prevent Sable from reclaiming Milo while the case was reviewed. And somewhere across town, Sable Whitaker sat in a cold kitchen, staring at a stack of unopened bills, fingers drumming against a glass of wine, unaware that a war had already begun. The courthouse in Clatsop County stood like a solemn stone guardian over downtown Astoria. Its neoclassical columns and time-worn steps half buried in snow. Icicles clung to its eaves like sharp teeth, and the flags out front snapped in the cold morning wind. Nora stood outside Courtroom B with Milo seated beside her, swinging his feet above the tile floor. He wore a borrowed wool sweater over his thin shirt and clutched Kodiak's leash tightly in both hands. Even though the dog sat calmly at his side, Nora glanced down at the boy. "You okay?" Milo nodded slowly. "Are we going to the same kind of place they sent Ezra to?" "Ezra?" "A boy from school. They took him away to a place with a fence. He cried a lot." Nora crouched to his level. "No one's taking you anywhere today. Not unless they try. And if they do, I'll fight them with everything I've got. Okay?" Milo didn't smile, but he leaned forward, resting his head briefly against Kodiak's fur. "Okay." The doors opened. "Case number 3342B, a clerk announced. Custodial petition, minor child, Milo Evan Hart. Petitioner, Officer Nora Delgado. Respondent, Mrs. Sable Whittaker. Nora stood, smoothing her jacket, and took Milo's hand. Together, with Kodiak walking beside them, they stepped into the courtroom. The space was smaller than Milo had imagined. Wood-paneled walls, a single judge's bench elevated at the front, 2 long tables, and hard wooden pews along the back. Judge Marissa Templeton presided, a woman in her late 60s with a sharp, clean voice, and the kind of face that rarely gave anything away. Sable was already seated on the opposite side of the room. She looked different under the sterile fluorescent lights, less polished, more brittle. Her usual smooth bun was fraying at the edges, and she wore a long beige coat over a pencil dress that no longer fit as crisply. Beside her sat Elliot Vance, a sharply dressed attorney with thin spectacles and an expression that never moved unless it was meant to. Judge Templeton opened the proceedings. Miss Delgado, you're requesting temporary emergency custody of the child. On what grounds? Nora stood, her voice measured but steady. Your Honor, on January 14, I responded to a 911 call placed by a neighbor, Mrs. June Lark, who witnessed the respondent, Mrs. Whittaker, forcibly expel Milo Hart, age 5, from the home he shared with her and his deceased father, Evan Hart. He was left in the snow with a bag of clothing and no supervision. Templeton turned to Elliot Vance. Mr. Vance? He stood slowly. Your Honor, while we don't deny that there was an emotionally charged incident following the tragic loss of Mr. Hart, my client, Mrs. Whittaker, maintains that it was a momentary lapse in judgment under extreme grief. She did not intend for the child to be harmed. Furthermore, my client is the legal stepmother and wishes to resume custody immediately. Nora took a breath. Your Honor, I've also submitted a personal letter written by Evan Hart dated shortly before his passing. While not a legal will, the letter explicitly states his concerns about Mrs. Whittaker's behavior and his intent that custody, if necessary, be considered for someone else, specifically me. Elliot smirked faintly. A non-notarized letter with no witnesses. We request that it be dismissed as hearsay. Templeton raised a hand. I'll review it myself. The judge paused, then leaned forward. Is the child present today? Yes, Your Honor, Nora said. Milo didn't speak when the judge turned her gaze to him, but his hand tightened on Kodiak's leash. Mr. Hart, Templeton said gently, do you feel safe where you are now? Milo looked at Nora, then at the judge. Yes, ma'am. And are you scared to return to Mrs. Whittaker's home? A pause. Then, I don't want to go back. Templeton looked down at her notes. Silence stretched long. Mrs. Whittaker, Templeton finally said, I recognize that grief can cloud judgment, but abandoning a child in freezing conditions constitutes more than grief. Given the documentation, witness testimony, and the child's own words, I am granting temporary custody of Milo Evan Hart to Officer Nora Delgado. Sable shot upright. You can't do that. He's all I have left. The judge's gavel struck once. Ma'am, sit down. Outside, Milo clung to Nora's coat. Does this mean I get to stay? For now, she replied. And maybe longer. That night, Nora received a text from Caleb. Evan's policy was real. $200K, Sable's the listed beneficiary. She knew. And across town, Sable poured another glass of wine, her fingers curled around a legal pad. At the bottom, circled twice, guardianship. Days passed. Milo sat building towers while Kodiak watched. Then a knock came. Mara Jennings from Social Services stood with a clipboard. I need to conduct a home inspection. She asked Milo questions. How's it been here? I get Coco sometimes. And she doesn't yell, even when I spill stuff. After Mara left, she said quietly, we received a petition from Mrs. Whittaker's attorney. She's got a lawyer. You've got a badge, but no paperwork. Then we get paperwork. That night, Caleb texted, found a key, possibly Evan's bank deposit. At Coastal River Bank, they opened the safe deposit box. Inside was a notarized will. I, Evan Hart, being of sound mind, declare, in the event of my death, custody of my son is to be transferred to Nora Delgado. Sable Whitaker is not to be considered for custody due to repeated emotional abuse. This, Caleb said, is the nail in their coffin. They secured an emergency hearing. Nora presented the will. Templeton scanned it. Given this new evidence, the court extends temporary custody to Officer Delgado indefinitely. Sable rose. You can't do this. But that night, Sable made a call. I need a car and I want to know where they keep him. The next morning, Nora found Milo's bed empty. The window was cracked open. Milo. They followed the trail. Kodiak sprinted. Inside the van, Milo huddled, wrists tied, terrified. Sable glanced at him. I'm not hurting you. I want Nora. Nora was in the cruiser. There's a shack at the docks. Sable parked, dragging Milo inside. Kodiak growled. Nora's boot met the door. Kodiak lunged, shielding Milo. It's over. He's mine. I have Evan's words. He chose me. Milo ran into Nora's arms. 3 weeks later, the final hearing. Milo testified. I want to live with Officer Nora. She talks to me like I'm not broken. Dad knew that. He trusted her. So do I. Full custody is hereby granted. Kodiak barked. Sable was sentenced. At Milo's adoption, the heart lantern was lit. Dad said the lantern could guide any ship home, Milo said. It still can. Sometimes, even people. That night, Milo asked, can I still call you Officer Nora? You can call me whatever you want. Then I'll call you Mom. That's perfect. Kodiak curled beside the bed. The room glowed from the nightlight. And in the home they built, not with blood, but with bravery and kindness, a new story began. Sometimes God's miracles arrive as a woman with a badge, a child who still believes, or a dog who never leaves your side. In the darkest snowstorm, a single light can still guide us home.